So I'm really excited that you guys chose to come into Winter Garden right now. We are to talk about innersourcing, and we define innersourcing at Capital One. Although this is the working definition we've been using, is it's applying open source principles and practices to proprietary software. And we use that a lot. We true back oftentimes when we're talking about innersourcing internally. I will ask people, well, what would open source do? And then often sort of it's a way to sort of steer the conversation. We are working to actively scale it at Capital One. And I know I'm standing between you and happy hour, but if any of the things I'm talking about today resonate with you and you have ideas about what I'm going to talk about, then I would love to have a conversation with you today or tomorrow. I should introduce myself. I am Sally Deering. I joined Capital One in 2011 in project management and program management work. So I've led projects in our card business, our commercial banking business, in our corporate audit practices business. I started formally as the InnerSource program manager this year. January 2nd was a great way to start the year, when our OSPO formally expanded their remit to also cover innersourcing and to start it really as a program. I did want to say I worked at Bank of America in IT infrastructure. I worked at General Electric in a lot of different functions in ops and call centers and product teams, and I worked at Gartner Group way back when. And so I've worked in and outside of tech for a long time and with developers and all types of functions. But I love innersourcing because for me it's a culmination of a career of herding cats and helping people reach goals and to reach their potential, teams and people to reach their potential. I love the sales and the process and the consulting aspects of it to help developers sort of understand the benefits of innersourcing, because they don't all understand it. I'll talk a little bit about Capital One real quick. It's a US-based company with some international presence. We do sell credit cards. We have retail and commercial banking services, and we have a large auto finance business as well. And we are on a journey to disrupt banking the way that people have thought about banks for 100+ years. So you hopefully have seen that in our ads and the products and services we provide. One way we're rethinking banking also is that we think of ourselves sort of internally as a tech-first company. So we went 10 years ago, we started on a journey to change our technology from the inside out. So we rebuilt our infrastructure way back when as a start. In 2015, we did make a declaration about becoming open source first, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. We declared we were going to go all in on the public cloud and have done that. We have we've built a modern data ecosystem to enable real-time data and to leverage machine learning. We knew we needed to become really great at building software, so we built an in-house organization of about 14,000 developers. And in 2022, we launched Capital One Software as a business. And all of this has set the foundation for leveraging AI, as that has started in earnest, as I'm sure all of you know. I will say Capital One is really an entirely different company than it was 10 years ago when it started this journey. And it was a massive multi-year effort, as you might imagine, and it did require all parts of the business, all lines of business, to come along on that journey. So we do have some experience in changing our culture and transforming, and we know it takes persistence, and we know it's a long game. So I mentioned that in 2015, we said we'll be open source first, and that was in terms of using open source and in contributing to open source. We do sponsor a number of foundations to help keep open source sustainable. We've launched more than 40 of our own projects in open source, and we've invested over the years in our governance and how we manage open source internally. So why is Capital One adopting InnerSource? We are doing it to achieve many of the benefits that we've seen in open source. Fairly simply said, harder to do. We want to increase innovation with diversity of thought. We want to increase code quality with more eyeballs, and hopefully all that sounds very familiar, right, as in open source. We want faster time to market, and we have stories that are emerging about teams that are, hey, I can do that, 7 sprints faster when I've had contributor SMEs come help us. We want to reduce development costs. We've got a fairly large army of developers, and we want to be able to leverage that and use that effectively. And we also are seeing more stories and more instances of reuse over reinvent as we sort of get the machine going. So how are we thinking about how to scale inner-sourcing at Capital One? And really, we've been talking about it as a flywheel. So I'm going to read these definitions because I've heard the expression so many times, but I'm like, let me look this up and really see what it is. So main definition was, it's a heavy revolving wheel in a machine that is used to increase the machine's momentum, or a reserve of available power, which is really energy that's ready to be unleashed. And then the flywheel effect in business was coined by Jim Collins in From Good to Great book, where he said, for business, the small wins, a flywheel effect is the small wins that accumulate and create momentum to deliver compounding benefits, a self-reinforcing feedback loop. Once it's spinning, it can maintain its momentum for a long time. And so really getting to that tipping point where it's self-reinforcing momentum is really what we are wanting to do. So taking from Jim Collins' description, we are doing that by taking specific small steps where we can accumulate visible results from inner sourcing activities. And those results can be quantitative or qualitative. We were talking about that a little bit in the panel prior. We want to share those wins with our developers, and that's what we've started to do, so they can see the benefits and opt in to participate. And so like open source, InnerSource is self-motivation and it's interest, right, from the software developers. Do they want to contribute, and do they want to open their code bases? So we want to start a movement where people want to join of their own volition and get this flywheel spinning. So that all sounds really very simple on paper. So here's where all the challenges come in. So on the left side of this, sort of a list of open source practices that we want to apply and scale. So code transparency, we use GitHub, which does go a long way towards transparency. But we know that we need robust documentation that's consistent and everywhere. We have teams that are setting up engagement models that are different than the way they've been used to working. Typical, I think a lot of the large companies we've been hearing and talking about, there's definitely silos. So setting up engagement models that are new, takes effort. And we need to get religious about publishing roadmaps and backlogs across our software. And also it's a shift regarding community driven. I mean, it is a shift in mindset to start everything as open, even internally, as a default. Like just start everything that way. That's a shift, in how we've worked in the past. So we're tackling these various hurdles in different ways, and I'll talk a little bit more about the details. So we're looking at what can we do related to culture, what can we do related to tooling and documentation, what can we do in terms of marketing and communication. What can we do in terms of process and how people work, and then also motivation. So there seems to me, my sense is there's a sweet spot for developers, right? At some point they sort of tip over to wanting to do open source or inner source for that matter. So like that flywheel definition, we are working to create these small wins that we hope will accumulate. The culture can be the biggest and the hardest, but you saw from our tech transformation that it's something that we've tackled before. So we know it can be done. And in that area, we're focusing on those that, I know this all sort of just makes sense on paper, but we focus on developers that already open source and are passionate about InnerSource. And we have quite a few of them. And we want to leverage them as a community to help with our marketing and help with the storytelling. And we just started actually an InnerSource Ambassadors program to help encourage people to not leave their teams, go outside of their teams to have conversations, get out of their comfort zones and use InnerSourcing as a topic that they can go talk to other people that they might not normally talk to. It's been really, we want, one person tells their friends, they tell two friends, et cetera. That's kind of the flywheel we want to get going. It's been fun to watch some of these ambassadors as they sort of realize, oh, this helps me expand my network. It helps me expand my influence. It gives me empowerment that I didn't have before. So it's really, it's been gratifying for me to see that, see them realizing that. The other area is I'll talk about tooling specifically. So a couple of years ago, there was a movement to really get InnerSourcing off the ground. And one of the big lessons learned there was that we did need tooling. And so an InnerSource marketplace was built last year. And we've been focused on that. I'll talk a little bit about that as well. It basically it curates all of the enterprise InnerSource opportunities so people can find where they can contribute. And GitHub does a bit of that. I'll ask folks, well, can't we just find stuff in GitHub? But basically, not only is it curating and adding a bit of quality check to doing that, but it also is tracking the enterprise metrics on InnerSourcing. It also has an enterprise leaderboard for recognition, and we're working on connecting the work in this marketplace to our performance management processes. In terms of process, I do a lot of process consulting. I give kudos to my GE Six Sigma training for this, but a lot of consulting with our tech and our product leaders around where do they get started in terms of opening up their code bases for InnerSourcing. Like what order of things should they, what's the order of things they should do? And also, what does it really mean to apply open source practices in like the day-to-day way we work? And I've been learning along the way too. And then the last area is around motivation, and I think we touched on it actually a little bit in the prior panel. And this really is around helping developers and their managers have the conversation about InnerSourcing, and in the development plan conversations that they have. I've realized by talking to developers and managers that that's not a connection that they're naturally making. That if a developer wants to learn a new skill, if they want to learn about new product or different products in Capital One, and they want to grow and move around, like InnerSourcing is a really good way to do it. And in that space, I'm working with a variety of our leadership councils and our DIB group, Diversity, Inclusion, Belonging, on making that connection. And it sort of was a light bulb for me. The word belonging is in the B in DIB, and we talk about belonging in these communities for open source. I mean, that applies to InnerSource as well. But a lot of our DIB folks, I'm going to go on a limb here and say, they're not technical. They haven't grown up in a developer, software engineering org. So they're not really familiar with that connection of the open source communities and InnerSource communities and what that means and why people do it. So really, what are we seeing? And we're seeing the wheel is starting to turn. InnerSource can go in a lot of different directions. We heard, again, on the prior panel, lots of definitions of InnerSourcing. People think about it differently. They're solving different problems with it. And so we really focused on that InnerSource portal that was built last year. We said, well, let's give it a chance. So we focused on the first few quarters of this year has been focused on getting the number of contributors there and the number of code bases open on it, growing that. So we started, what's in blue and red is the target and actual of numbers of contributors, and the yellow and the green is target and actual of the number of code bases open. It's going in the right direction. We started with small targets just to see what could we impact, what would make a difference. So really the story has just begun. And we're also learning along the way, what can we measure, what doesn't make sense to measure, but we just said, this is how we're gonna start. So the story's just begun. I will say capital is known to embrace strategic change for the long haul. So I am looking forward to seeing how this story unfolds. And I will say in summary, I just had a couple of points in summary. One is there's no silver bullet, and if anybody has one, please, 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 before you go to happy hour, come tell me, because I would really want to hear this. It takes a lot of, what we've seen is it takes a lot of testing and learning, but we saw within a few months, we sort of saw that organic growth start to appear. So that's why I sort of had promise of, okay, there could be a flywheel in here, there could be energy that could be unleashed. The second point is around committing to what you want to measure and drive, and keeping it really simple and picking one angle. You can change it later if you want to, but just to get started. My manager's in the room, and we had a lot of that conversation at the beginning of the year. It's like, this is the bet I think we should make, and let's try that this year. And then the last thing I would say is we found that tooling and communication are just foundational to just get it started. And that, my friends, is all I had.